How's it going, Giants fans? Welcome back to Fireside Giants with you boys, Alex and Anthony. If you are heading home for the holidays, make sure to be safe. Don't drink and drive. Be safe. Think of your loved ones and enjoy a great holiday season with your friends and family. A lot of people in the comment section have been wondering why Anthony has never asked me how my day is doing, yet I always ask him how his day is doing. So, Anthony, I'm going to give you a chance right now to ask me how my day is doing or going.
What if I choose not to? I'm just kidding.
Well,
Alex, how was your day?
My day is going splendid. Thank you for asking for the first time in the history of Fireside Giants. Now,
It's actually the second time. It is the second time. This has happened once before. This is the second time ever in over 1,000 episodes.
I appreciate you thinking about my well-being on today's episode. So much respect and love for that, guys. But today we're doing a fan mailbag, trying to get some of your questions on the channel on Twitter. If you do not follow us, make sure to go follow us. We'll be doing some more fan mailbags in the near future and getting you guys involved. We'll even post on the YouTube community. So in case you aren't on Twitter, you can help us out there with some questions of your own. But it's going to be a fun one. I think there's a lot to discuss. And I just tweeted out actually a second ago, you know that the Giants are having a better season than usual when I don't know everything about every first-round pick in the 2023 NFL draft. The past couple of years, we were already talking about draft picks. I already knew what was going to happen. I already knew all the players that were going to be on the draft board for the Giants. But now I feel like I don't know that many, and that's a good problem to have. I can do my research later on, but right now we're about to make the playoffs. If we win tomorrow, we are basically in the playoffs. We have an 87% chance, even if we lose right now. So feeling good about our chances, and hopefully we can see some meaningful football in December and in January, and simply not just go home and look at the draft and the future there. If you watched the Jets game last night, like watching paint dry, I mean, that was one of the most awful games I've seen. I don't know what it is about Thursday night football games. They seem to get worse every single week. And the Jets just looked horrendous. Zach Wilson looked god awful. Hopefully the Giants could put a little bit more excitement on the field tomorrow. But Anthony, before we dive into the fan mailbag, how are you doing today, my friend?
I am doing great. And you actually just brought an idea to my head. I saw this on Twitter. You mentioned Zach Wilson. I want to ask you this question before we start going through some mailbag questions. If Daniel Jones was on the Jets, how many wins do they have?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I thought you were going to say, do we trade for Zach Wilson and try to give him a chance?
No,
I was going to say, don't even freaking ask that question. Don't ask that question. But that's an interesting one. That's actually a little bit more intriguing. If Daniel Jones is on the Jets, I think that they probably have 2 more wins than they do right now, if I was to guess.
I think they're a playoff team. I think so. I just saw this on Twitter, and I was like, that's a really interesting idea. And then someone was like, well, what if you took the receivers from the Jets and threw them on the Giants? How many wins do the Giants have? And I was like, Elijah Moore on the Giants would be pretty nice.
That would be pretty nice. Elijah Moore on the Giants. I mean, I would love Elijah Moore, but, we've talked about how many different receivers the Giants could possibly trade for. And that's part of one of the questions in today's mailbag anyway. So let's dive into that. Right off the bat, Joseph Michael says, Giants fans have been excited with a full complement of draft choices and money to spend next year under the new regime. Is it a certainty they draft wide receiver in the first 2 rounds? I mean, after getting Wan'Dale Robinson, obviously the ACL tear, so we're kind of looking at him right now and wondering if he's going to be, or what his impact will be next year. But I'll tell you this right now, I think that the Giants probably draft a receiver in the first round. We need linebacker help. We need receiver help. But if they want Daniel Jones to succeed, they need him to be a focal point. They need a receiver to be a focal point, and the free agency class is extremely thin. It's extremely weak. We know this already, but, looking at the draft options, Jackson Smith and Jiba, there's a lot of guys. Addison, we'll look through and look at their film over the next couple of months and show you guys what they have to offer. But right now I'm saying I definitely think the Giants, there's a pretty high likelihood that they draft a receiver in the first round. And if they don't, definitely in the second round. What are you thinking about that?
So I don't think that it's a certainty. If that's the question, is it certain that the Giants go receiver in the first 2 rounds? Now, I think there's a really good chance that they do. I think if the draft, if the board falls the way that they want it to, they'll take a receiver in the early rounds, either round 1 or 2. But I think what's more certain is that the Giants take an interior offensive lineman in the first 2 rounds. I think that is the number one priority for this Giants team. I think when you look at what they have on the interior, yes, they have a young guy in Joshua Zito who they think could be a long-term piece, maybe, but that's not going to stop them from drafting an absolute stud to play left guard for the next 10 years, right? And you look at the center position, John Feliciano, somehow almost a Pro Bowl alternate or whatever. but he is not a long-term solution either. And neither is Mark Lewinsky. He's been really bad this season. So I actually prioritize that a little bit more than I do the wide receiver position going into this draft, because I do feel like the other conversation that we were having in yesterday's episode, the Giants have an opportunity to trade for a receiver this offseason. I think that's definitely a possibility. So I wouldn't necessarily say that they have to draft a receiver in the first 2 rounds. They did that last year. They got Wan'Dale Robinson in round 2. Keep in mind, he'll be back at some point next season. He should make a huge impact. He was playing really well in Brian Dable and Mike Kafka's scheme before he got injured. And I think that he'll return to the lineup and make a huge impact. But I think that they do need another piece in the receiving core, but it doesn't necessarily have to come from the draft. I'd like to see it come from the draft. Hopefully the Giants are able to draft, the next Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson. That would be amazing. I would love to see them get a stud in round 1. But if they find a stud offensive lineman in round 1 to play on the right shoulder of Andrew Thomas, I'm going with that like 9 times out of 10, unless it's that good of a wide receiver prospect. So no, I don't think it's a certainty, but again, I do think there's a really good chance because it is a huge position of need, and it's something that the Giants really need to address if they want Daniel Jones to succeed with a Giants helmet on.
Yeah, I mean, if they went with an offensive lineman in the first and a receiver in the second, or vice versa, I think I'd be good with that. I think linebacker in the 3rd round, maybe even 2, is a necessity. I really do think they're going to make a run at Tremaine Edmonds from the Bills, obviously connected to Joe Shane. Was one of their draft picks from a couple years back, and he's been tremendous at linebacker for a very long time now. So I think that they try to make a run at him in free agency to fill that position and maybe use the draft capital, get a nice young piece in the 3rd round to pair with him.
And keep in mind, they have an extra 3rd-round pick this year from the Kadarius Toney trade, so they could potentially get 2 3rd-round prospects or package those 2 thirds and move up to get a second-round pick to have 2 second-round picks. So there's a lot of opportunities here. As this question stated in the beginning, the Giants have a lot of draft capital in this upcoming draft, so they have a lot of room to work and a lot of moves that they can make via trade if they want to move up in the draft. So if they don't find that receiver in round 1 or 2, or early round 2, maybe they trade into the back end of round 2, and that's where they find it, or the offensive lineman, vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. But moving on to the next question here, we have from Michael. I'm going with the obvious. What exactly are they going to do with Kenny Golladay? What makes the most sense in this horrid situation? So this is a pretty easy question, in my opinion. Kenny Golladay is going to be cut after this season, right? You might as well save the money, right? So next year, Kenny Golladay, if they were to keep him, has a $13.25 million base salary, but it has $4.5 million guaranteed, $21.4 million cap hit. If they release him pre-June 1st, they'll save $6.7 million. If they release him post June 1st, they save $13.5 million, but that money gets pushed down the road anyway. So, you're looking at saving a little bit more earlier, or rather later on by cutting him then, or, obviously you could just cut him earlier and save the $6.7 million. Right now, $6.7 million for the Giants is way more valuable than what Kenny Golladay is giving them. So they're definitely cutting him. It's not even a question. He is not a guy that you can even trade with his monster cap hit. Obviously he's still on the books for the 2024 season as well. He has $21.4 million cap. I think there's an out in his contract, but he's gone. Like, he's as good as gone. There's no chance that he's going to be on the Giants moving forward. I don't know if he's cooked. I don't know what's up with him. I don't know if he's just not a scheme fit. They don't like his attitude or his work ethic. There could be many different variables here that impact how the Giants have just refused to utilize him, and the injuries and whatnot. But, Anthony, I imagine you're in the same boat. Like, he's pretty much the first thing they're doing is cutting him after the season ends.
Yeah, so if the question is what should the Giants do with Kenny Golladay, I'm going to say, this is kind of an unpopular opinion, they should start playing him. Honestly, I think that he should get another chance. I know that he's disappeared from the lineup. A lot of that had to do with injury. Yes, bad work ethic, like you mentioned, maybe some attitude issues, whatever, just not playing well when he's on the field, drops, whatever. They should start playing him, I think. I think that the Giants, as soon as they clinch that playoff berth, Kenny Golladay should go out there, see if he could start to recoup some of his talent and get ready for the postseason, because it's all hands on deck. What happens if, knock on wood, God forbid, Isaiah Hodgins goes down with an injury? Well, then you need to throw Kenny Golladay back in the lineup, and he's not ready to play because he hasn't been playing at all. I think that the 1 snap and the 7 snaps, like that kind of playing time is a bit ridiculous. They are paying him a lot of money, and he was really talented at one point. Is he playing well? Absolutely not. Has he ever played well for the Giants? No, not even close. He's been terrible since he joined. But I'd like to see him at least see the field. Like, let's get something out of him. I just think that 1 snap in last week's game is just a bit ridiculous. He's completely held out of the lineup, and I'm not a Kenny Golladay supporter or fan or anything, but I'd like to see him go out there and get a couple snaps to see if maybe he can get his confidence back, prove some people wrong, and make something happen. But at the end of the day, what should they do with him in the offseason? They should cut him, and they should hold him until June 6th. I think, or June 1st, rather. I think that they have a lot of time and a lot of cap space. They don't have to cut him immediately. They can afford to hold him until June. They can afford to have that cap hit on the books until June and release him then. And I think that's exactly what they should do, because that amount of money, that $13 million, it's almost double the 6.7 or whatever it is that they'd be getting if they cut him pre-June 1st. So you wait till June, you cut that guy, and you can definitely go out there and roll that money over, or at least utilize that money in a much more efficient manner when you have 13 million being saved by Kenny Golladay. So I think that they should hold him till June and just cut him then.
Yeah, that seems to be the easiest decision for the Giants. Now moving on, Jack, hypothetically, if DJ isn't our quarterback next year, who would you have at quarterback? If DJ isn't our quarterback next year, I'm drafting someone. I'm not going to be signing someone off the market unless you could trade for Lamar Jackson, which I think is unlikely. I'd rather draft somebody and to have Brian Dable have a raw prospect that could essentially develop into something, let him carve out and mold a young player into something that he wants him to be. And I think that's probably your best case scenario. If the Giants don't go with Daniel Jones, we discussed this yesterday. We're pretty much 90 to 95% sure that he will be back, or at least I am. But I just think you probably go with the draft pick. You're still early in the rebuild. You have to capitalize on that rookie contract, and a young quarterback with a lot of the young cheap deals on this team already. You can really start to address other positions with your salary space, and strengthen spots that are weaknesses through the draft and through free agency. And then having a young quarterback that they can mold is definitely an ideal scenario. The question is, who would that be? And how would they have to move up in the draft to get him? So definitely an interesting situation. What are your thoughts on that one?
So I think Daniel Jones is the quarterback next year, no doubt about it, but that doesn't stop the Giants from going ahead and drafting someone to sit behind Daniel Jones, because as I mentioned in yesterday's episode, look at what happened with Josh Rosen. He was drafted in the first round. He stunk. He was a terrible quarterback in his rookie year. He was traded in year 2 for a second-round pick, despite how bad he was. So if you draft a quarterback this year and you still keep Daniel Jones, and Daniel Jones plays so well that you don't even want that rookie quarterback, you can still trade him the following year and recoup at least a second-round draft pick. It was a second and some change for the Dolphins. That's what they gave up for Josh Rosen. Obviously, he didn't last long there either. So I think that it's smart for the Giants if they have question marks about Daniel Jones and a quarterback prospect that they really like, they feel like they can turn into a superstar. If that falls into their lap in the draft, they're going to go ahead and take it. And they know that they can get some draft capital in return for him only a year later. So I think that it's a good idea. But if there's anyone else that I could think of that might be the quarterback of the Giants other than Daniel Jones next year, there are going to be some names that swirl in the trade rumors this offseason. Lamar Jackson, as you mentioned, Alex, I would love to see Lamar Jackson on the New York Giants. However, I think the price tag is definitely too large. There's no shot that it realistically happens. I know that there's some other names out there. Derek Carr could be on his way out of Las Vegas. Aaron Rodgers might want to get out of Green Bay. We'll see what the hell happens. I think it's all going to be really crazy. And, I don't see the Giants actually making a move for a veteran quarterback, unless you're talking about a guy like a Geno Smith, right? They find a backup quarterback who's ready for that starting position. Geno Smith actually could have a pretty big market this offseason if he wants to go for a larger contract with another team. But at that point, is Geno Smith versus Daniel Jones, are you really upgrading that much and creating a Super Bowl contender by going from Daniel Jones to Geno Smith? Probably not, in my opinion. So you're sticking with Daniel Jones and maybe drafting a quarterback. But in all likelihood, this is probably another prove-it year for Daniel Jones in 2023. And if he doesn't prove it, go ahead into the 2024 draft, and that's where you find your quarterback.
Yep, I think that's probably the ideal scenario as well. So Dylan Backer, one of our own at ESM, what are the chances Hodgins next season? This is easy, 125%. A pretty affordable deal, and allowing him to keep going. 84% catch rate this year. Had some of the best hands coming out of the draft, I think in 2020, I believe, or 2021. Very, very talented player with some nice skill sets that we can continue to extrapolate on and build upon. So I imagine you're in the same boat. 100% chance for me that Isaiah Hodgins is on this team next year.
Yeah, Isaiah Hodgins is back next season. I don't know what kind of role he plays because, as we mentioned a couple questions ago, the Giants are probably going to be in the market for a wide receiver, whether that be trading for a proven veteran like Keenan Allen or whether that be drafting someone in the first or second round. So Isaiah Hodgins is going to be on this team. I'm not going to say he's going to be starting on this team. He's not going to be WR1. He might not even be WR2, but he deserves to be on this roster at the very least. He's definitely played his way into an extension with the Giants, and whether that be as a backup, as a rotational guy, or if that actually does mean he's WR2 on this roster, I think that's something that he could probably handle if the Giants don't really bolster that receiving room. But I think that he's definitely earned his way back on the team, but we'll see what his role is, because I think that the Giants are definitely going to try and make a big splash move at that position this offseason.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the next question here is, if we do make the postseason, who would we want to face? It seems like right now, so here's a question for you. The wild card, I'm looking at the kind of stats right now. The first 7 teams in each conference make the postseason, correct? Is that that's the new rule? There's 7 seeds.
Yeah, so there's 7 seeds, but it's the 4 division winners and then 3 wild cards. So it's the
Gotcha.
3 best who didn't win the division will make
So
it
it's
after
Dallas,
the division winners.
Giants, and the Commanders. I mean, obviously, I'd rather play the Commanders if they make the postseason too,
So how it would start is the 2 seed would play the 7 seed, the 6 seed would play the 3 seed. So we would be in line right now to be playing the San Francisco 49ers.
That's tough.
The first seed, the Eagles, will get the first round bye. However, there is the chance that you could see potentially, if we beat the Vikings and the 49ers continue to win, we could face the Vikings in the first round of the playoffs, which if we do beat them this Saturday would be
doable.
The opponent that we want to see. And you know what? True. Even if we don't beat them this Saturday, that is the opponent that I want to see to answer the question. I would like to see the Vikings because at least the Giants have some experience playing that team. We have not played the 49ers this year. The 49ers are hot. Kyle Shanahan really has that team working in high gear. But the Vikings, they have lost some games to opponents. They've got 3 losses on the record. They've lost some games to opponents that they shouldn't have lost. They've been in really close games that shouldn't have been close. They should have gotten a landslide victory, and they didn't. So if there is a team that I want to face in the first round, if there's a team I think we can upset, it's going to be the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think that Minnesota probably, if you have to pick one of the 4, it's difficult. Brock Purdy, backup quarterback. I'd bet on him having a bad game at some point, so maybe you go that route and you just put pressure on him, use those really tough, really good pass rush the Giants have, and just hopefully maybe you get hit home and rattle them a little bit and force a couple of mistakes and turnovers. But definitely, pick your poison in that instance. The last question I do want to hit on from Joe Silva, friend of the podcast: who would you attack in free agency, the draft, when it comes to fixing the linebacker position? Now, personally, I think the Giants use free agency to solve linebacker because you can get some good veterans in free agency to plug those gaps. And ultimately, you could go through the draft, but it's a big liability. I think a lot of times you get a lot more value out of rookie receivers than you do rookie linebackers. So if I'm the Giants, Tremaine Edmonds, as I mentioned before, free agent from the Bills, grades incredibly well every year. He's a really, really solid tackler, really solid run defender. This year, he's probably having his best season. I think, what does he have? A 7.6% missed tackle rate, second lowest in his career. This is a player who routinely does extraordinarily well. He's actually been very good in coverage this season. Traditionally hasn't been so good, but this year, for some reason, doing a lot better. They're trying to maybe put him in the box a little bit more and have him stop the run and play more closer to the line of scrimmage. But I'll tell you what, Tremaine Edmonds free agency, I think, is the way I would go when it comes to getting solving the linebacker position, but then allocating a mid-round pick. Like, as you mentioned before, we have a couple third-round picks, one of them coming from Kansas City. Maybe you go and get a linebacker in the 3rd round. You address interior offensive line and wide receiver in 1 and 2. And then, you pair a young linebacker with a veteran like Tremaine Edmonds, and you feel pretty strong about that. At least you have a leader there. You also have Darian Beavers coming back, who looked pretty good during the preseason, so maybe he makes some noise. Micah McFadden's still around. Jalen Smith is a reserve. Even Landon Collins, we'll see what happens there. I doubt he remains on the team beyond this season, but it's possible. What would your preferred strategy be when it comes to linebacker? I think a nice, healthy blend of free agency and draft is probably ideal.
Yeah, I think that's probably ideal, a nice healthy blend, but it is a position of need for the Giants, and it is something that they have to just improve upon, because the linebacker position has been a mess for the Giants for years and years. It's been something that they've neglected and failed to address. And I think this is the year where they finally need to go out there and find someone. Now, to be fair, the Giants tried to find a couple players at linebacker this past offseason, but they dealt with a lot of injuries. They tried to get Blake Martinez back in shape. Hopefully he could recover from the ACL. He'd be a starter. It didn't work out. He was never able to recover from the ACL, and now he's retired. That's really unfortunate for the Giants, but good for Blake Martinez. I hope he has a really successful post-NFL career in life. But They also drafted Darian Beavers, who tore his ACL. So they made some moves and they tried to fix that position. It just everything they did failed to pan out. They tried to give Tate Crowder that expanded role. Now he got cut. He's on the practice squad. I think that the addition of Landon Collins is a big one. I think that one will pan out. I think he will be an impact player for the Giants during this final stretch of the season, but they need more at that position. Absolutely. So hopefully whatever moves they choose to make this offseason don't get decimated with injuries or whatever. If they go out there in the middle to late rounds and they find the linebacker prospect that they like, they should draft him and they should pray to God that he doesn't get injured. And I think that's really been the big story of the Giants this year. What could have been, right? Because this team far exceeded our expectations. They're 8-5-1 right now. They've got a really good shot at making the playoffs. But what could they have been if they didn't suffer all of these injuries? What would they look like if Wan'Dale Robinson was out there all year? If Sterling Shepard was out there all year? If they didn't have any injuries at the linebacker position? If Xavier McKinney and Adoree Jackson never went down with injuries? This team could have won more games by now and probably would be a shoo-in and already have clinched the postseason. So what could have been is always going to be my question with this New York Giants regular season. But let's see what happens if they do make it into the postseason, because maybe it just won't even matter and we'll go ahead and play some games not in January, but in February. So again, looking ahead to the offseason, they got to make some moves at linebacker. I think free agency is the way to go. I like Tremaine Edmonds. That's a great name that you mentioned, but also in the middle rounds of the draft, it's always a good way to find some depth at that position. But before I hand it back to you, Alex, and we wrap this up, I have another question. This is from Frank Strange on Twitter. He has a question for the mailbag. He says, how many more years you think it takes for the Giants to win another Super Bowl?
Oh, that's always a tough question. If I had to guess, I'd say within the next 6 or 7 years, we could possibly get there. I think it's going to take a lot. It's going to take a perfect sequence and a perfect timing for the Giants. I think their defense is probably 2 years away from, or maybe even a year away from being very good, barring injury. I think their offense is, if they retain DJ, Saquon Barkley, improve the interior offensive line and get themselves a wide receiver one, they could be pretty good next year. I think we're 2 years away from being legitimately competitive, but I think within the next 6 or 7 years, it'll all come together and we get that one just like really competitive team that can win a Super Bowl. But it's going to take a lot.
Yeah, I'd say a maximum of 8 years. And the reason I say that is because I think that the New York Giants will win in the decade of the 2020s. The New York Giants are the only team to have won a Super Bowl in the 80s and 90s, 2000s, and 2010s. And I will not allow that streak to end. They will win one this decade. So within the next 5 or so years, I think they'll go ahead and pull a rabbit out of the hat. But I actually think that the Giants are closer than most people give them credit for, because I really think that they nailed it with this offseason hiring Joe Schoen and Brian Dable. And I think that's the difference maker. You can have all the talent in the world. You can have really great players, a star quarterback, all of that. But those pieces will eventually fall in line for the Giants. They'll find those pieces. But it's really hard to find a head coach that you believe can take you to a Super Bowl and win it. And it's really hard to find a general manager to find all those pieces like the superstar quarterback or the WR1. And I think I'm really confident that the Giants hired the right people this time, and they've got those guys in the building who can go out there, build the roster correctly, and win a Super Bowl. So I think within the next 3 to 5 years, I think we're talking about the Giants being 5-time Super Bowl champions, and we're all watching the sun set on a beautiful earth.
Absolutely. But guys, I'd love to hear perspectives on all the topics we've discussed. We'll be doing more fan mailbags. Always happy to get your questions and whatnot involved and hear from you guys. That's why we do it after all. So as I said earlier in the episode, make sure to be safe this holiday season. Get home, spend time with friends, family, and enjoy a couple days off from work. Definitely deserve it. I know you guys have all working really hard preparing for these holiday seasons and buying gifts for every single person. So sending our love and best wishes to you and your families. Make sure to like and subscribe as always. And we'll catch you guys on the next Fireside Giants episode.